Hello, everybody. It's Helen Butler from Inspired People Solutions again. Thank you so much for joining us on our podcast. It's lovely to have your company, and we are joined by the ever delightful Angela Olanda from Zen HR Consulting. Hi, Ange.
Hi, Helen. How are you?
I'm great, thank you. It's great to have you on board again as we
Thank
tackle
you.
the world. Restrictions easing through this pandemic. Our last podcast, we touched on employee experience, the journey back to work. And today, I think let's drill down a little bit more for businesses and HR managers. And the things that we want to cover off today is, how to do the approach back to work. What does a balanced workplace look like? Ange has been reading some research about the majority of employees do want to return to work, but what does that look like? And we'll look at the health risk of doing that, also potential age risk as well, and people that do have care responsibilities as a result of this pandemic, and what reasonableness looks like post COVID-19 as restrictions ease. And remembering this is a brand new world for us as we navigate the new normal. It's going to be a situation where Ange talked about last time, having a highly individualized approach to employee requests. So we don't want to take away from that, but we just wanted to give you, I guess, some broad brushstrokes about things that you need to be considering as your workplace slowly and staggeringly reopens its doors. So, Ange, it's great to have you along again today.
Thank you.
What are some tips? We spoke a little while ago about, this happening. What's your advice for businesses as restrictions start easing, schools go back, employees are looking about what's over the horizon for us next? What's some advice initially that you would give to businesses as they start to reopen their doors?
Thank you. Thanks, Helen. I think really is to take a slow and measured approach to it, as we talked in our most recent podcast around having plans in place and looking at how the business plans are and overlaying that with a workplace plan. But really, the advice I would be giving and suggesting is don't rush it. Don't rush the return to the workplace process. And also maybe consider hanging back a bit and watching how things unfold for others who are going before you in returning to the workplace. So, maybe don't be the first to look at coming back to the workplace. I think looking at how your office space will be utilised. So, consider a 50% capacity or staggering in an essential services type scenario by looking at, okay, what would be the equivalent that we would typically run what we call a skeleton workforce that might happen over a Christmas, New Year period. Let's look at introducing that to start with and see how that goes. And then, maybe a week later or a couple of weeks later, introduce a next layer of that, and then a next layer and next layer, building up to where there is a capacity, where there's a balance, where social distancing measures are adhered to and all the safety requirements are adhered to, because again, that needs to form a major part of your plan. But also, if working from home is still working really well for your business and having a balance of that, or having a rotation of workers coming in to the office for a couple of weeks and then spending a couple of weeks back at home to enable other workers to come into the workplace, that might be suitable too. So kind of like a workplace roster, for want of a better word. So yeah, really just having a measured approach. And when considering that and how you'll fill your workplace up, and I'm not meaning to the extent where it was pre-COVID, it's going to be filled by 1.5 to 2 meter distance, so literally half of what your space was. So think about how a relationship's going to be fostered and supported in that, and how will that space now be used.
Yep. And there's also, like, in that too, there's got to be a consideration not only in the workspace that people are going into, there's also a consideration about, well, what's your entry and your foyer situation going to be? How many people are going to be allowed to go up in the lifts at the same time? So you've got to think about also start and finish times for people as well. We touched on lunchrooms. what do lunchrooms look like for people?
Yeah.
So, you gave us some really good thoughts about that. So did you just want to flesh those out a little bit too, Anne?
Yeah. So, thinking about our lunchrooms and our tea breaks where, can I even say this? Back in the day, we used to be able to go to our lunchrooms and sit down and catch up with, our friends in accounting or our friends in IT and share a lunch with them. I mean, those days are really over because these communal sharing spaces like hot desking now is just out the door. You could probably say lunchrooms are effectively the same too, and your tea break. So how are they going to be managed? Do employers consider putting lunch on for their workers or having an Uber Eats kind of delivery system where everyone puts their order in and it comes into the office? So the employees aren't going out there to buy their lunch, but they're still supporting the local cafes and restaurants by probably purchasing something via an Uber Eats kind of scenario maybe, or delivered to the office, or one person from the office goes down and buys it. So looking at ways where we're reducing that communal contact. I hadn't mentioned it in our pre-conversation, Helen, but I thought, having that cup of tea with that worker, we might be in a cubicle or a workspace that's a few 100 yards away from each other. And back in the day, I know I used to go walk up to and go, oh, hey, put my arm over the cubicle. Hey, how's it going? How's your weekend been? Blah, blah, blah. Now in this new paradigm that we're in, it'd be, I'm just going to FaceTime call you and Zoom call you from my cubicle, where I'll probably see you put your hand up and wave to me, but we'll be talking face to face on our computers, having our cup of tea. And I think that's kind of quirky. At least we could stick our heads up over our cubicles and wave to each other, kind of thing. So
True. And I had a client the other day say to me, I think I mentioned on the last podcast, they did a survey of their staff as to how they're going with working from home and what ideally would be their new working environment going forward. Like, would they want to come back into the office, or
yeah,
different, mix up the arrangements? And this HR practitioner was really flexible in the options that she gave to her staff, because she didn't want to rule out anything, but she wanted to have a really good reflection of the employee voice about what they were thinking about. And she was saying that they would have, like, all wear their work shirt day, or they'd have crazy hat day. They'd meet at, I don't know, one time, do lunch together
yeah,
and drinks after work. And some of the feedback that she got was that the employees had been more creative in how they connect with each other, and more of an effort had been made to do that. And a lot of
wow,
felt like, because they had to make more of an effort to connect with people, they've got much more rewarding working relationships now, as opposed to the office where you can just see someone and smile. Here,
yes,
you really have to pick up that phone. So it's going to be very interesting, because we will still have to do things via Zoom or Google Hangouts or Skype, whatever you're doing.
yeah,
To do some aspects of our jobs digitally, especially if some of our teams working from home, or that roster arrangement, and we might even be sitting
absolutely.
cubicle to each other at the appropriate
Yeah.
time. We're talking to each other on the computer again. So it's
Yes.
paradigm to get sorted, but there's heaps of considerations with that. The lunchtime thing, which is really quite sad, really, when you think
Yeah.
how great a couple of lunchtimes were a week, when you could sit around the communal lunchroom and have a chat, and be with different areas of the business as well. It was a
Mm,
nice collaborative thing to do.
mm, mm.
Yeah,
And I think the majority of people wanting to return to the workplace uh, are really because of those relationships and having that. Everyone has a work friend. There's always someone that's got a relationship, a friendship kind of relationship in the workplace. And um, through having a physical distance of working from home arrangements, yeah, I mean, those things really change. And I really love that HR practitioner was really open and flexible. And it's kind of like, let's just get to know each other a little bit more. We know more about Bob in finance than we ever knew, because we're doing Zoom calls with them. and we're getting to see their house and, you know, kind of what he kind of likes to wear on the at casual dress day at home kind of thing. So I think we are, you know, in the interruption of animals and kids and noise in the background, and I think that that's really opening us up to accepting that we are people and we are human, and at work we don't necessarily need to have that facade like when we put on our suit or we put on this armor. um, it's all come down, hasn't it? It's all really open, and we're so much more compassionate, grateful, empathetic of each other, and caring and looking out for one another, that I really hope that that continues as people merge back into that working in the workplace, and through that balance of fostering those relationships of people working in the workplace and those who are working from home.
Yeah,
What
absolutely.
you don't want is an us and them thing to happen. So and that's what can happen when there are remote working areas or people working remotely, even if they're working in a completely different office. And that's another point too, businesses to consider when they're opening up and returning back to the workplace. If they're operating offices in different locations, think about, well, what are you going to be opening up first? And you know, what comes second. So sorry, I know I digress a little bit or go off track to what we're talking about, but looking at staging and staggering, really, if you're running a few offices, looking at how that works for everyone too. But yeah, I just love that idea of everyone having a hat day and a drinks day and a lunch day via Zoom and digitally. So yeah.
And just picking up on what you said too, one of the things that managers really need to be, I think, once you do have a decision in place as to when some people are going back to the office, have a big team meeting with your whole team, decide as a team what really worked well for you when you were all working from home. Keep some of those measures in place, because, you know, if there's a second wave of this, and we all have to pull back and return home again, you want to have some consistency and collaboration around, well, you know, let's make some changes and let's all agree on it. So if you have that conversation with your team about, this is the way we're going to be moving forward, with some of us in the office and some of us from home, you get buy-in from everybody. You've all agreed on it, and you've all come to a consensus around, this is how we want our team to work. So just think about that too, and that dilutes the us and them sort of scenario going forward.
Situation. Yeah, I really love that, Helen. And I think too, with exploring what's worked and what hasn't worked, and then refining your policies and guidelines around that, so that people are aware of what the expectations are of each other. So looking at what working from home looks like, and what working in the workplace now looks like, and what that hybrid version of that looks like too. I think values will be a really important play in that, and trying to weave into those policies your organisational values and behaviours about how that can be represented in a working from home arrangement, as well as what I mentioned before, that hybrid scenario of working from home and a working in the workplace.
Some,
Um,
some of the other things that I really thought would be great to touch on as well, and
yeah.
you know, sometimes we've got employees that potentially we haven't known that they might have health issues in the workplace, but as a result of this pandemic, that might be very critical to them, that they are better off working from home, because if they catch it, it's lights out, which would be terrible. So
Mm, mm,
there's also the age issue as well,
mm.
and also if employees have caring responsibilities as well. So if you are an employee that is at risk, or your age is puts you just in the at
That
risk
category, yeah.
of the virus, and you've got care responsibilities, how would you advise managers or businesses to approach those particular issues with employees?
Yeah, I would really approach it through a volunteering process and say, look, guys, I'm really open to hearing what your concerns are in relation to us looking at opening the office back up. We are aware that COVID-19 has very significant effects on people who are within a certain age bracket, as well as those managing certain health risks. And if you're also caring for people as well who are in any of those categories, there's also risks associated with that. So I would open that up as a, please come forward and let us know, because we want to work with you on ensuring that your risks, your personal risks, so getting back to what we talked about in our last podcast around an individualized approach, it will be really focusing on and drilling down into that individual and working through those mitigating risks. Now, if working from home is working and they're doing their job well and they're producing the outcomes that are needed, I think it'd be a great decision to continue that arrangement for as long as possible, keeping in mind the mental health requirements around that and ensuring that they are feeling mentally supported, and they've got all the mechanisms around them so that they are having a pretty balanced life. So health and fitness, having regular breaks, ensuring that they've got a daily schedule in place to support their work outputs as well as their personal leisure, things like that, and keeping in regular contact. I think the issue really is when an employee is not wanting to return to the workplace.
Yeah.
And it's understanding specifically why they don't want to return. So I'll get you to sort of start talking about that, Helen, if you could. I would just turning the tables here.
I mean, I was.
You had a good piece about that,
Yeah,
a good idea.
Yeah, so
share.
there's always one squeaky wheel, and I guess as we talk, and we can think about the squeaky wheel that we've had to come across and manage in our various roles. But if you had an employee that came to you and said, well, nothing has, no, sorry, let me just say, if you're doing a staggered work approach, back to return to work approach, and an employee came to you and said, I am not prepared to return to the office, I want to stay working from home, because we were rushed home at the beginning of March or mid-March and expected to work from home. Nothing has changed in our approach to this pandemic since the middle of March. We still don't have it under control. Social distancing seems to work, but we still have outbreaks. You're going to expose me as soon as I leave the front door to potentially people, strangers who have it, and it doesn't mitigate my risk at all. The only way that I feel safe in this pandemic period is to stay working from home. And there is an outright refusal to return to the office until this pandemic is under control, wherever that may be. So, I mean, that's a pretty extreme example, but there is potentially some HR practitioners or business owners out there who will have an employee like this. How the heck do we manage that? I mean, I've got a few ideas, and I know you do too, but what would be your approach to managing you can't say they're wrong because they're right. What's changed? Testing's changed, but we still don't know exactly what's going on. We still don't have a vaccine. They kind of have a point, but are they being reasonable?
Are they being reasonable? And I think that's a real key word there, Helen. Listening to their concerns is the main part. So getting them talking about what specifically is making them feel like they're at risk when the minute they leave their door to when they arrive to the workplace, because as employers, we are all going to be ensuring that our workplaces are as safe as humanly possible. And all that great information is on Safe Work Australia for anybody listening to go and explore. They'll have a range of excellent information for workplaces in varying industries. So following those guidelines, you are ensuring your workplace is as safe as possible. So assuming that that's all done, and you've got your policies, your procedures, your hand sanitizers ready to go, your face masks if need be, and your posters up, all right? So the worker's refusing to attend to work. Listen to their concerns. And then you say to them, all right, well, where do your concerns really lie? How do you commute to work? Are you driving your car? Are you catching public transport? Okay, so do we need to look at the times that you start work? Do we need to look at equipping you with some hand sanitizer that you can keep at home or keep in your pocket? Do we need to equip you with some gloves? Do we need to equip you with a face mask? If it's driving to work, how do we make sure that you get some parking so it's easy? And where, depending on where you park, how long's that distance between the car park and your office. So trying to work through those with them and come up with solutions to those concerns. I think if they do express a health risk or an age risk, which we may be unaware of, I know that most employers do typically ask employees before coming on board. A pretty common question is that, are there any health issues that may be preventing you from performing the inherent requirements of the role? And they're typically things that are related to more physical impairments that might stop you from fulfilling those requirements of the role. But, you know, if someone's suffering from type 2 diabetes, depending on the job though, let's say an office job, it's really not going to be detrimental to that person being able to perform their role, as an example, because it'd be managed, right? But when we're at the age of COVID-19, that as an example, they are in a high risk, they are high risk individuals. So now it's something that if they're willing to share that information with their employer, not unduly or under any pressure to, but if they want to freely share that with their employer, so their employer has a clearer picture about that person and can work with them really closely around that, I think that will be helpful about having that really open communication. We talked about having the COVID Safe app. That's also, you know, something that will be useful for employers to consider. You know, suggesting. We can't force employees to download the app. That's been made very clear by the Prime Minister and his associates, and I agree. It cannot be something it's a highly individual decision. However, employers can suggest that as part of another safety measure that employees could take on board if they choose to do so. I certainly have, because I want to protect my family and the people that I interact with. So I have no issue. I think Google personally, and I'm going to get into, I don't want to get controversial here, but I think Google and Facebook and Instagram probably have way more information about me personally than what I think this COVID Safe app will probably be doing. And this is going to benefit me and my community more so than what I think Facebook and Google probably would. So,
The app,
it's my pace, yeah.
the intention behind the app is the safety of Australians and our
Yes.
community. So I think if you approach it on that basis, then that's probably the best.
Yes.
But I think you're absolutely right. Is the first thing we need to do, and we've touched on this ever since this pandemic happened, it is showing empathy and care and listening to the concerns of your employees, because mental health is something that's cropping up all the time. People potentially are isolated working from home. Sometimes they won't have a chance to chat to people. So the thoughts going around in their head can build up anxiety and may not be the best clear thinking time for people. So as team leaders or managers or HR practitioners, it's really important to be able to listen and show some care and compassion, because sometimes the unreasonableness is because they haven't had somebody to bounce through, or to think about, oh, you would provide me a car park to get to and from work. Oh, that would be amazing. And that just eradicates all that concern. So I think you're right. It is about reasonableness, but also approaching it on the basis of what we've spoken about, highly individualized, and just taking that moment to not jump to conclusions, but just be considerate of another
Yep.
point of view, and trying to understand where they're coming from.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's perfect.
And if the role's really needed to be back in the workplace, I mean, that really needs to be critically assessed by the employer, because if you can keep the worker at home, I believe that it's really recommended that that's the way you go. But if there's a really strong need to have that person physically back in the workplace, and you've explored and you've discussed and you've been reasonable to all the objections that the employee might have. I mean, there has to be a line drawn at some point. And, you know, it comes down to really a reasonable management directive, which if an employee fails to comply with a reasonable management directive, factoring in everything that we've talked about around safety, office safety, to and from work, health care, and so forth. There's two things that come into mind. Is therefore it morally okay to go and pursue someone that's failing to comply with the management directive, which could result in a disciplinary action, a breach of an employment contract, or termination of their employment contract, which all, really scream to me legal issues. Or the other side of it is, are they actually suffering from a mental health? Are they not coping mentally with this whole concept of coming back to the workplace? So, as an employer, maybe your final step before really looking at the pursuing a failure to comply with a reasonable management directive is offer the employee some counselling and some employee assistance through an employee assistance program.
Yeah, I think that's critical, and that you will be looked on in an incredibly bad light if you don't follow some really mitigating steps. And I think counselling is a great thing.
Mm.
But also have a look potentially at redeployment opportunities. Is there other roles or responsibilities that this person could reasonably
Yeah.
working from home during this pandemic? So you potentially have a consultation or a conversation around other duties they could potentially perform as well, that would keep them safe. But that's just, it's really important to have that dialogue, that agreement in place, and put time limits and restrictions on when you're going to review it to see how it's all going. So there's a number of options that you could explore before your name goes up in lights for sacking someone for being scared about returning to work, which you do.
Absolutely.
Because there's
Absolutely.
a whole heap of things that you could do
Yeah.
before you get
And I think too, that's great that you say that, Helen, because that's reminded me of something that I've come across in some of my research around employers' approach to COVID-19 in the workplace and the treatment of employees. And one key thing that's come out is the way employers treat their employees now will have an effect on their employer brand for the next 2 to 3 years. So really thinking through your approach to your workers in every element, being a macro approach and then to that right down to that individualized approach, is going to be critical to your employer brand, because you don't want to be up in those lights for the wrong reasons, and a poster employer for COVID-19 and failing to care for your workers. So
and make no
key
mistake,
point.
those plaintiff law firms are watching. They will be onto this in a heartbeat. So I would say, if you're thinking about things, or you've got concerns, or you just need to speak to someone about what your plans are, get advice. Just have a chat to someone who can help you, and then you thrash out the scenarios that you need to follow to mitigate any risk in this space. Because you're absolutely right, Ange. How you treat your employees now will speak volumes, not only for their output now, but also for the future and your longevity of keeping some great people in your team and fighting and working so hard for your brand.
Yeah.
On that note, thanks, Ange. It's great to talk to you.
Thanks, Helen. It's a pleasure. It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
And we'll put some links up on the show notes in relation to Safe Work Australia and some resources that we mentioned as well. And also Ange and my contact details. If you would like to get in touch to talk about any HR issues or moving forward, our details will be on there, and don't hesitate to reach out. So thanks so much for listening, everybody. And thank you, Ange.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.